First of all, I just want to say it's a real honor to be here with these two extraordinary talents, and I have to admit, a bit intimidating. So, all right, where do we begin? So I'm curious, because it's the two of you, and you know, here you are at the top of your game, both of you, extraordinary, extraordinary artists. How did you collaborate? I mean, were there moments where the rubber met the road? Were there challenging moments? Was it always sort of surprising and inspiring, or how did the band work?
No. Danny beat me a lot. I think the answer is very well.
Clearly, given the result.
I remember our first meeting together, and actually the first thing you had me do was we read through the whole script. I played Steve Jobs, and you and our producer Scott played, and I think a couple of assistants from the office played every other part. And we read it through. We talked about a lot of things, and you know, there was time for Danny to give notes and for me to execute those notes. And if I didn't quite get it right the first time, you know, the second or the third time. But the great work and the real luxury, and this was a result of Danny insisting on it, was that we had an almost play-like rehearsal period. We did this all in San Francisco, and we rehearsed in a rehearsal studio just the first act for 2 weeks, and then shot just the first act, and shut down for 2 weeks. Yeah, you know how expensive that is. And shot and rehearsed the second act, then shot the second act, rehearsed the third act for 2 weeks, shot the third act, and of course that rehearsal also included notes where I'd go back to the hotel and tweak a couple of things.
Who arrived at that idea, that design, that process? Because I'm curious about that, and also I'd love to have been a fly on the wall in the studio when you came in and said, okay, so here's the deal. We're going to shut down, just shut down for a couple of weeks. And then we shoot, and then we're going to shut down again, and then we shoot. And I mean, I just think it's brilliant, and it was absolutely right for this piece. But
for anyone who might not know, that it's an expensive thing to do because you continue to pay everyone when you shut down, but you're not, as far as the studio is concerned, you're not doing anything, but of course you are, and it shows up on the screen.
But how did you arrive at that idea? I mean,
well, that was we were talking about this outside just earlier, because Catherine's about to do a play. So we were talking about, I mean, I began in the theatre, so we had a shared heritage, indebtedness actually. So I started in the theatre, and I loved the theatre, an amazing theatre called the Royal Court Theatre in London, which had a relationship with Joe Papp's Public Theatre, where you're going to do your play. So I've always loved that process, and as soon as I read the script, it was like 200 pages of dialogue. And I thought, we're not going to be able to do this. We're not going to be able to do this and just let the actors turn up and kind of mumble through it and kind of like. So I thought the only way we'll really be able to do it is to actually break it down into 3 parts. I mean, Aaron had broken it down into 3 parts. That was the conception of the piece, as you've seen. And I thought we'll enforce that in the way that we try to execute it, and we try and make each act as separate as possible, but visually but the most important thing, it would allow the actors to sort of get on top of each block of work, because they were coming back in each act. They all had these huge chunks to perform, to learn, to inhabit, and it gave them a chance to just get on top of it, really, and get on top of Aaron. Aaron's quite intimidating, you know. Actors were all like, "Oh, is he going to tell me all off about semicolons? What's the difference between a semicolon and a colon?" All that kind of thing. He's not like that at all, actually. He's a typical person, like a theatre writer, who's in rehearsal and loves hearing the words and just, you know what it's like, the general vibe of rehearsals and actors worrying about stuff, and you know, that kind of way you gradually kind of open up a thing. And we collaborated very well. And I mean, just to give you an example, I mean, everything. There was a big scene. The big scene that you've seen. There's an amazing scene with with Seth Rogen when he sat out in the audience on his own, and he takes him on in front of his, and that was originally in a dressing room, and
it was in private. That scene, yeah.
And then we had then we talked, and we wanted to try and open it up. And Aaron went away and did this rewrite of it being in a public space, and it's very subtle what he did, but it's actually very beautiful because it's suddenly he no longer just confronts him privately, which he has done already. He's prepared to, and he's not a very public figure was at that time, but he wanted to actually confront him in front of it, and that allowed us to then inhabit. There were some people around who were the new acolytes, who were meant to look like Apple, the new Apple store that hadn't been invented yet, but it was on the horizon, it was coming. And so we wanted to make it feel like these were the new believers, and here was the old guard, and could the two, what would happen if the two were brought face to face? And he rewrote it beautifully for that. So the collaboration was really, it was good. Yeah, it was really good.
That's great.
It shows in the film. But I think that process of perhaps shutting down and then, I mean, 'cause, you know, obviously everybody then becomes re-energized. Yes. You know, the way you do it, you know, the way, the grind of a long schedule, for instance, it begins to wear on everybody. I mean, there's no way you can, you know, you can kind of hide from that. And that's really an extraordinary
And the other
process.
thing that it allowed for, and because of the peculiar nature of this, you know, it all, each act basically being a continuous scene. You know, Danny always jokes about how at the top of the first page it says, you know, interior Flint Auditorium, and you can put it for 70 more pages before you see another slug line. But it allowed in rehearsal for act run-throughs, you know, which you never have, and we have in a play, but you don't have in a movie, with the set spiked out on the floor with tape, and there would be full run-throughs, so that, you know, not only could Danny see what we had, and I could hear what we had, but the actors, you know, could remember, okay, if this scene I'm shooting on Friday, I know exactly where my head was on Thursday in the moment right before it.
All right, so that organizing principle, how did that, you know, here you are looking at this, you know, incredible individual's life. You've got the book, you've got all this material. How did the organizing principle come to you?
Well, before I knew what I wanted to do, I knew what I didn't want to do, and that was write a biopic. A cradle-to-grave story where you land on the person's greatest hits along the way. I wanted to use a narrower lens than that, because I just thought it was, it's a structure that's very familiar to audiences, and I don't really think you can get it that much. It tends to feel like a dramatized Wikipedia page. And no matter how well you do it, there's sort of a ceiling on how good it can be. I'm most comfortable as a playwright. I'm kind of a playwright faking my way through movies and sometimes television. So I like claustrophobic spaces, and I like compressed periods of time, especially when there's a ticking clock. I love being behind the scenes, in this case, literally behind the scenes of these beautiful palaces in San Francisco. You know, we did shoot at Flint Auditorium, San Francisco Opera House, Davies Symphony Hall. And so, as it's just kind of my nature as a playwright to want to hone as closely as possible to the unities, unity of time, place, and action. And all of this sounds good. I still didn't have an idea. Again, all I knew was what I didn't want to do, and I spent about a year, maybe a little bit more, talking to all of the people who you see in the movie, with the exception, obviously, of Steve, who had passed away by the time I started writing, and then several dozen others. And points of friction began to appear, really interesting points of friction in Steve's relationships, most particularly with his daughter, Lisa, who Lisa did not participate in Walter Isaacson's book because her father was alive at the time, and also John Scully, who did not participate in Walter's book just because John kind of went into hiding after he left Apple. It really had a big effect on him. And along the way, I tripped over just a tiny piece of fairly benign information, which was that in rehearsal, maybe a week or so before, in 1984, before the launch of the Mac, they couldn't get the Mac to say hello. And it was a really big deal to Steve that the Mac say hello, that it be the first computer to introduce itself, and they all scrambled around, and that's how I found out about the special tools that you need and all this stuff. And I thought, well, that's kind of a cool intention and obstacle to start hanging more important things from. And I got this idea, what if the whole movie is just 3 scenes? Each of those scenes took place in real time, no time cuts, and they each took place backstage in the 40 minutes leading up to a product launch. And I got the idea, and I was excited about it for a few minutes before I thought, they're not going to let me do that. They're looking for a biopic, but the they in this case was Scott Rudin and Amy Pascal, who at the time was the chairwoman of Sony, which was at the time the studio behind the movie. They were very enthusiastic about it.
As they should be. Grateful about it. So, speaking of the people that you were able to meet, were you able to meet like the Joanna Hoffman?
Yeah, they came.
I mean,
pretty much everyone came in, apart from Chris Ann, who you'd met, but she didn't come in. But everybody else came in to meet the actors. Some of them developed quite good relationships, like Woz and Seth were like this. Seriously, they went to the Magic Castle together. Woz is into tricks. He does magic tricks, not very well.
He's terrible at them, but it's so charming.
So yeah. So and Joanna Hoffman, who was, I mean, I'd speak for Aaron here. I mean, the impression I got from the script, when I read the script, I thought, because you read the book and she's not in the book very much. No. Although she is in the book, when I went back to the book after we'd finished, I realised she's not in the book very much, but when she is in the book, Jesus, her analysis of Steve is like, wow, it's so precise. And Lisa's not in the book very much because, as Anne said, but clearly these 2 women, I thought, had an incredible effect on him as a writer. I remember thinking that before I met you. I thought these 2 women have actually, because and the way I described the script to myself is it's a monster made beautiful by language and by these 2 women who actually in some way, and they're your way in. Otherwise, it's a tech world, isn't it, or a business world, and they're your way into it. Really,
there's no doubt about it. And it was. Like Danny said, Joanna isn't mentioned a lot in the book, but when she is mentioned, and one of the things that's mentioned about her is that she won this award that they had for who could stand up to Steve the best, and she won it 3 years in a row, so I knew I wanted to meet her. And then after I just spent a little bit of time with her, I knew that she would be a character in this story, which I didn't quite have yet still. It was spending time with Lisa, where I get a lot of use out of technology, but I don't really get emotional about technology, and I don't think I'd be the right person to write a story about technology. It was talking to Lisa where I found something to be emotional about, and then that just kind of grew branches with the other characters.
I think we're going to take questions from the audience in a minute. Maybe one last one that we could do is, or just a question to both of you. Do you think that genius and madness kind of coexist naturally? I mean, is this, in other words,
I wouldn't know, Danny.
No, I think you were referring. It's that thing that Woz says. Again, it's really Seth. He's so good in it. I think he's just he says it's decency and brilliance, and not.
It's not binary.
It's not
you
a binary
can be decent
thing.
and gifted.
Yeah, decent and gifted at the same time. And it's a weird thing about Seth because he said something to me. He's a very. I'm sure some of you know him. He's a very lovely man, very affable guy. But he said something to me just once. He said, and it was about something that Woz had said to him, which is that the nice guys are not rated enough, you know. And he clearly empathise with that, because as a comedian, he's probably not rated as a straight actor, and he probably looks at the straight actors who can't do comedy and thinks, that's not really fair, is it really, in a way? And he clearly identified that with Woz, is that Woz was the nice guy who wasn't given the credit. And I think Seth, he just said it once, and I just saw a little glimpse of him thinking, but he's a wonderful man, and he does, in a way, he is a comedy genius and a very decent man at the same time. So he's a perfect example of what Aaron got him to say on behalf of Woz in that scene. Yeah.
And Fassbinder and Winslet are just, I mean, at the just phenomenal performances.
Yeah, you can say that again. By the way, Seth Rogen, I think, was only the second funniest person in the cast. Kate Winslet is the funniest person you're ever going to meet. I'm dying to see her in kind of a grown-up comedy. She's incredibly funny.
Has she ever done it?
No. But she would be great in any era. She would have been competing with Katharine Hepburn for parts and getting them. You know, Danny likes to say, if you're going to cast Michael Fassbender as Steve Jobs, you better cast Kate Winslet as Joanna Hoffman, or you know, somebody needs to hit the ball back.
Right.
He's also, Fassbender's interesting as well. Fassbender's a comedian as well. He doesn't often show it. You got a little bit of it in the Tarantino film. Because there's a bit of the Cary Grant in him, and I think you'll see that at some point. That he's kind of, because he just, obviously he's very intense. This role's particularly intense, but he has a real comic flair as well, you know. And he knows, and they both know how to set each other up for laughs. You know, when they see them coming, which we were desperate to get, and I hope you did laugh sometimes. You know, they were desperate to set each other up for those things, you know.
All right, so any questions out there? Yeah. Hi.
Do you mind diving a little deeper into what the notes process was like once you came on board? Were there moments that you were looking to draw out of the script? Were there things in particular that you guys were discussing?
Yeah, so if you can hear at the back, he was asking to go into a bit more depth about the notes that maybe we were giving Aaron. When I came on board, the script was in an extraordinary state, brilliant state. And I think a lot of that work had been done between you and Rudin. Rudin's clearly a great dramaturg, you know, in the way that he works. So ours were more, and I say ours because it was me and a producer, Christian Coulson, who I worked with, and we came in, and ours were more to do with shaping it to our idea that the three acts, that the three parts would feel very separate, that there'd be differences between them, and that was the biggest example of it was trying to make the Woz thing a more public scene. It was things like that more than anything, wasn't it? And it was, and the really particular one was, I remember when I finished it, the first time I read it, I thought, he's got to have kept a copy of that first painting she did on the Macintosh from when she was 5 years old. I remember just thinking that, because I was very moved by the relationship and surprised by the relationship between him and his daughter. And obviously this guy's a genius, and the impact he's had on our lives, etc., etc. But also, the things you relate to, I did anyway, because I have two daughters, is you relate to that father-daughter's relationship, really. So it was to try and, I suppose it was stuff like that, really, that we just banged on about. I remember asking him to write about China a lot, and he kept declining, quite rightly, because that's a kind of, because it's interesting when you work with writers, is that because often, you know what this is like, you often have an agenda as a director where you're trying to illustrate things, and sometimes it's over-illustrative, or it's over-authorial, really, whereas a writer's writing from inside a character, and there'd be no reason for Woz to bring up, I kept saying, Woz has got to bring up China, hasn't he? And he was saying, oh, you know, and he went off, he came back and kept not bringing up China, and I gave up eventually. And that was right and proper, because, you know, the character wouldn't do that, and it has to be from inside the character. You know, otherwise you get that thing which we all know and we were talking about before, actors would then turn around and say, my character wouldn't say that, you know, so you'd be defeated anyway, so.
And the three different formats, we didn't talk about that.
Oh, right.
That was, how did that, you know, how did you arrive at that?
Again, it was the idea of making the acts as distinctive as possible, and we thought, and then Alvin Kuchler, our cinematographer, came up with this idea of why don't we use 16 for the beginning? Because Steve did see himself as he was as the film says, he was worth over $400 million by then, but he saw himself as a rebel, as a punk, you know, as a pirate. Literally, they called themselves pirates, and so there was some.
That's great.
They flew the pirate flag.
Yeah. Yeah. So 16, which especially now compared to high definition, feels so rough and kind of, it felt early days and rough and homemade, a bit like the garage that they invented the whole thing in. It felt very, so that was good for that. And then 35 for the middle act is a big storytelling act. Obviously, it's quite theatrical in a way, and the ornateness of the opera house and the revenge story. And 35 felt like the perfect format for that. And then we wanted to finish in high definition, and we used the Alexa camera for the third part, because although that's 1998, although none of us were using it at that time, he was, because he'd already launched Toy Story with his own money in 96. And I remember going to see Toy Story with my kids on a Sunday morning, an industry screening in London, in Leicester Square, thinking I'll have a snooze, you know, like, and I'll wake up, and I've just been electrified and realizing everything was going to change. Everything was going to change because the look of it was just, and it just turned animation round overnight. So it felt respectful and proper to actually introduce that clarity, that beauty, that simplicity of everything stripped away, and the clean lines of high definition are there now for you. But the actors hated it, of course, because it shows up everything, of course. Whereas Kate Winslet used to love the 16mm because it made her look younger. And she said, why can't we shoot the last part in 16mm as well? And just make it a loop thing.
Okay, next question. Let's go here.
Yeah, fantastic. Thank you so much. I have a question. Aaron, I love the verbose river dance and the way you write. And I'm just wondering, when you're dealing with real people, do you give any thought or concern to whether they speak in that way when you write it? And then for you, Mr. Boyle, if you give any concern back in how you present it, if this is at all representational of their actual selves?
Okay. First of all, I don't know why I was Aaron and he was Mr. Boyle. But actually, I agree with that. The answer to your question, and if you didn't hear it, the question was, when it's nonfiction, if I'm writing about real people, do I give any consideration to how those people actually talked when I'm writing? And the answer is no. I don't. I don't mean to be glib about it. I can't. I don't know how to do voices, is the answer to your question. I discovered that when it was finally time for me to start actually writing The Social Network. I had spent a year or so kind of getting ready to write it, doing the research, figuring out at least what the first scene was going to be. And really at the moment I sat down, it struck me that these were the youngest characters. I'd never written characters who were this young before. The movie starts off with a scene between two people who were sophomores in college. They're 19 years old. Suddenly I felt it incumbent to try to write in a different language. And it was a page and a half, really the worst writing you're likely to see in a long time. And I thought, this is ridiculous. I can only write the way I write. So I made no attempt at all to do any kind of vocal impersonation of the character, and also tried to signal with the script, and it's something that Danny and I talked about early on, again at that first meeting, that it wasn't important to me that the actors themselves do any kind of physical impersonation of the character. You know, Michael Fassbender doesn't resemble really Steve Jobs until the third act, when he kind of magically suddenly does, without any prosthetics, without any CG or anything. I mean, the effect is almost, you know, and I credit Michael and Danny with this. I didn't have anything to do with it. It is that he's kind of been struggling in the first two acts to, to feel comfortable in his own skin. And the third act, he's got a haircut, the black turtleneck, the jeans, and the glasses. And suddenly he oddly does resemble Steve Jobs. Kate, in the script, in the I give very little description, but in the description of Joanna, I did say that she has a soft Polish accent, and Kate did that. Michael Stolberg, after meeting Andy Hertzfeld, who has a kind of, and basically what Danny told them was, the people who were going to meet their real life counterparts, is, listen, if there's anything there that helps you, that you like in terms of physicality, vocal quality, by all means, go ahead. But it's not, you're not playing Elvis here. You're not playing somebody with an iconic physicality. So, no to my part of the question. And now, Mr. Boyle.
It's rhythm, actually. Because at first I thought it was vocab, and I thought what was wonderful about the script was there is a problem when you depict very, very clever people, isn't there? It's like, how do you depict really, really super bright people? And all these people are pretty, pretty bright. And, you know, do you show them writing equations on glass windows, and, you know, or opening up machinery? Or is it just a question of people telling them, you're brilliant, you really are brilliant? It's like, and the way that Aaron does it is he does it, well, I thought he did it through vocab. He gives these people, and it's brilliant, of course, because it's the tool that actors use more than anything, is language. Is so that rather than being good at physics or algorithms or whatever like that, they're good at language. And then I discovered, once we got it up on its feet in the rehearsal process, that it wasn't, because in fact the vocab is fairly simple, actually. The choice, the range of vocabulary is quite simple. It's the rhythm. Everything, all the meaning, all the understanding, all the character, everything's in the rhythm. And that's in Shakespeare, of course, as well. Because Shakespeare doesn't differentiate really how characters speak. He does a bit, but not very much. But all the understanding that you'll arrive at is through the process of speaking it. That was weird. And as soon as you've got actors, good actors like these, great actors like these, on their feet and starting speaking it, you can hear it, you know. So it's a weird thing to do with the cadence and rhythm, yeah.
You also, and I love this, in editing, you know, listen, the actors, they have got to breathe at some point during this, but Danny would take out 2 frames. Danny would lift out the breathing, and so they almost develop superpowers in terms of their communication skills.
Yeah, we've got a collection of their breaths, actually, on a file. But you can literally take it out, and you don't mind. It's impossible for somebody to speak like that without having that moment where they breathe, but you take out that moment and put it in the breathing file, and then it just flows through.
Okay, one last question. Yes.
Talking about the rhythm and cadence, could you just, is there a method to how you shuffle them together? It's so brilliant. I mean, across all of your projects, everything's so brilliantly shuffled together. Are you just pacing around the room and just kind of like writing things down as you come up with them, or do you write one person and then the next person, then kind of flip-flop back?
Which one of us are you talking to?
Mr. Sorkin.
Ah! Thank you. First of all, I'll try to answer as quickly as possible. I think everybody wants to get home, except us. We're having a great time. If you were to do a pie chart of the writing process, you would see that most of the time is spent, to the untrained eye, okay, it would look an awful lot like somebody sitting on a couch watching ESPN. Someone much more discerning, though, would be able to see that it takes a lot of thinking. And in my case, I cling like a life preserver to intention and obstacle. Somebody wants something standing in their way of getting it. They want the girl, they want the money, they want to get to Philadelphia. It doesn't matter, they've got to want it, they've got to want it bad. The obstacle has to be formidable, and the tactics that your protagonist uses to overcome that obstacle, whether he or she fails or succeeds, doesn't really matter, but it's the tactics that they use that's going to be the story, and that's going to reveal the most about the character. When I have all that, when it finally does come time to write, when I know what the intention and obstacle of the scene is, that you've got two people in a room who disagree about something, the correct time of day. Somebody wants something, something's standing in their way of getting it. When I'm ready to write, then I'm actually very physical when I'm writing. I'm saying all the lines out loud. I'm playing all the parts. If it's going well, I'm hopping up and down from my desk. I can wander far away from my desk while I'm writing a scene, having forgotten that I'm no longer typing anymore. I should run back there and probably get this down. I once broke my nose writing because I was very excited about a physical thing that I'd come up with where a character was going to lunge at somebody and his office mate was going to hold him back. I found myself in front of a bathroom mirror at that moment. It was like the fourth time I had done this. I was so happy that I'd found this thing, and I lunged right into, there was nobody there to hold me back. And if it had been a Scorsese movie, he would have said, "I cut, let's go again, this time a little less blood." And that's what I do. And if I went to a memorial on Sunday in New York, where it's the 1-year anniversary of Mike Nichols dying, Mike Nichols said he had a terrific way of really boiling things down to their most simple. And he said, go from one thing that works to the next thing that works. And that's what I try to do.
Beautifully put. Well, thank you. Thank you. Thank all of you.
Thank you.